Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to have fun playing with some Rit DyeMore Synthetic Dye so we can attempt to hand paint some 100% acrylic and some 100% polyester yarn. I have played with this dye once before in a very early episode of Dyepot Weekly, and I used a lot of dye to kettle dye some yarn. And I used so much because the bottles recommend, I think, that you use way more dye than you need to dye your garment because they want to help you get a more even color coverage. Last time there was a lot of rinsing and washing, so hopefully this time it won't be so bad. The two colors today I have are Royal Purple and Peacock Green. And we are going to dye some mini skeins that I just made on my PVC pipe nitty knotty. With some Red Heart Super Saver, which is 100% acrylic, and some Yarnspirations Caron Kindness, which is 100% polyester. I decided to go with some minis today for a proof of concept type video. If this works really well, then we can try replicating this on some full skeins in the future. But for now, I'm just pre-soaking the yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes. I have my 100% polyester and 100% acrylic minis, and I'm going to pour a tiny bit of the purple and a tiny bit of the green into some cups. I did shake them up first, and I do want to point out that these will stain things, so I protected my work surface with some plastic wrap that I'll use in one of the rounds to wrap everything up. I'm now going to use this tiny thin paintbrush to manually sort of put on some speckles. I did squeeze out, just with my hands, a bunch of water from this, but I'm curious, you know, is this going to spread? Will these strike? Will we have white left behind or not? But I'm just doing a really, really light application. First with our purple color, and then I will go through and do some green as well. I found this dye in person at my local Joann's. AC Moore and Michaels both carry some Rit dyes, but I didn't find any of the synthetic colors there. My Joann's has a lot more options, but I think you can also find it on Amazon, and I will include an affiliate link in the video description. But I'm going to flip this over. Yeah, I think that I'm going light enough here that I will probably place these in some kind of Ziploc bag for the steaming. Everything I'm using today is dedicated dye equipment. None of it is anything that I use for food, and so that's something also important to keep in mind. Now, the instructions recommend that you do some kind of kettle dye technique with this, but I'm going to try steaming. The directions say that you need heat for 30 to 60 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and steam it for 60 minutes, I think, because obviously I want to keep some of this variegated nature in here. And I don't even think I'm going to wash it because I think that a lot of the color is off, and here's some of this green color. The purple is the one that I used before. I have never used this green. It says it's peacock green. Sometimes these colors do change once you apply heat and when they dry, but right now it is looking sort of olivey. But I'm just sort of interspersing these green little bitty specks. And I did not dilute the dye at all. This dye is, you know, straight from the jars. And this is the same technique that I did with some cotton crochet thread, but the dye is different. That time I was using the Rit dye for natural fibers. And I do know that you can dye wool with this synthetic dye. I'm not doing that in this video. Maybe, depending on the results, we might play around with that more as well. But just like you could get some color on acrylic with the dye for natural fibers, you will always get the best results when you're using a dye that is recommended for the materials you want to color. I'm going to go through and add speckles to the side, and then we'll come back. Alright, I think I am pretty happy with these speckles I've added on. Since the color, it's not, you know, they're sort of randomly placed, I am okay putting them together. And I'm gonna pop them into this Ziploc bag, and we're gonna seal it and go steam our yarn. Here's all of our yarn in this little Ziploc baggie. I have popped it into our steamer basket, and I'm gonna leave it here for a full hour. I didn't even wipe down the work surface before I put the next series of yarn in here. I might end up wanting more of the color than this. Yeah, because there isn't very much that I have left, but I'm just going to apply, I think, the color with a foam brush, and I'm going to do, I think, just 1/2 purple, 1/2 green, and we will see what happens. This acrylic yarn can hold way more liquid than I anticipated, because you can see it's not going through super far, but it's not a problem because I could use a squeeze bottle instead. But I definitely, less is more. I just poured out a ton of dye into this cup, and I do not need to use all of that, because the more dye you use, the more rinsing you will have later on. But I'm going to go through and apply all of this dye.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, I'm now going to wipe down the excess around here. I put a lot of dye on here. I figured it was better to go big than just go home. And yeah, but the colors, I think the colors will be really nice once, hopefully, it sets with steaming. Now I am going to wrap this up. I am just gonna remove my gloves now so I don't get dye on the outside. But I am, yeah, just wrapping this on up with what I had used on my work surface, and now I'm gonna go pop this in the steam basket. It's only been about 10 minutes, and I forgot one aspect of using a Ziploc bag in here. I opened it a tiny bit so there's some ventilation. I am seeing, it looks like these colors are spreading out, even after 10 minutes, and you can see, maybe you guys can't see, but I see more of a bright green and purple there. But I'm gonna add our hand-painted yarn into here as well. And so I'm gonna let, again, everything stay in here for an hour, so I'll be removing the, quote, speckled one before the more hand-painted one. But yeah, let's see what happens. It has been an hour. I'm gonna turn off the steam basket. Technically, it's been an hour and 10 minutes for the more speckled yarn, and just an hour for the darker hand-painted. But let's see what we can see now. Things are still a bit too hot to touch, but we can take a closer look anyway. I see intense coloration in the more hand-painted. The speckles definitely spread. They are absolutely not as sharp as when I put them on here. I can tell that already just from looking at this. And this is in contrast with the video that I did where I used the Rit for natural fibers on cotton thread, and I tried that little speckling technique, and the colors did spread. So we'll see how far these have spread once I take it out and wash it. I'm going to leave all the yarn right here until it cools enough so that way I can comfortably remove it. And then also once it's completely cool, we will go and wash it. The speckled ones have cooled, and if I flip it over, you can see some pooling from some of the colors on the bottom. But let's see, actually, colors spread out, but I do see some discrete specks in there. And now I'm curious, how much bleeding will we get? All right, right off the bat, there's definitely some color bleeding. But I think a lot is staying in the yarn. Per the instructions, I am using warm, well, it's not quite warm yet, but I'm using warm water, and I will be adding some dish soap. You can see, but I'm expecting we're going to get more bleeding on the second set than on this one. But yeah, there's definitely some specks or variegated portions here. It's not bad. Not bad at all. Alright, I'm going to keep rinsing these, and we'll look at the difference between the acrylic and the polyester once things have dried. Things will look darker when wet than they do when dry, so always keep that in mind. But yeah, after a few more rinses, so I'm not really seeing any bleeding, we will go hang these up. This time, I am expecting to see some bleeding. Alright, I will say that was harder to get in than I expected, and you can see that our plastic wrap has a bunch of color in it. And there's a lot of color coming out of the yarn. Whew, a lot of color. Yes, I have all of the yarn here, and we are going to start rinsing with hot water. I mean, there was a ton more color that we used this time around. Even, ooh, that green is pretty. Look at that. I'm not sure which one that is, but I'm definitely seeing a difference in the hue with the green between, I think, the two fiber types. Ooh, that's real pretty. All right, I'm gonna submerge it. Once again, gonna add a bunch of soap. And yeah, I wonder how long we'll see bleeding. I know that the first time I ever did this, there was just so much bleeding. Hopefully, because these are mini skeins, and ultimately I did not use that much dye, it won't take quite as long. But again, you know, I will keep rinsing until the water runs clear, hang these up to dry, and then we will take a look at all of the yarn. Here is the finished dry yarn. We have the two acrylic mini skeins on the outside and the two polyester skeins on the inside. Ultimately, all of these 100% synthetic fibers took up color. We did get some reasonable speckles. It seems like the colors struck a little faster on the polyester, because you can see smaller, sharper speckles on this polyester yarn, whereas on the 100% acrylic, we still have speckles, and I'm using like air quotes here, but there's no question that the colors spread out further. Since these speckles are more spread out and larger on the acrylic yarn, I hypothesize that it takes longer for this dye to absorb to the acrylic than it did the polyester. If we focus on the skeins where I fully hand painted them, you can definitely note a hue difference. On our acrylic yarn, the green looks more like a teal. There's a lot more blue in it, and the purple is a lot more almost electric. It's brighter. Whereas overall on the polyester yarn, the colors are much more saturated. We've got a deep grass green, and then sort of an eggplanty, deep purple over here. And so again, it looks to me like the polyester was able to absorb more dye in the amount of time that we left the dye in contact with the fiber. I think that the difference in the hues between these two skeins is really important to point out, because if you are dyeing a synthetic dress or shirt, whatever garment that you want to do, the color might not be exactly what you see on the bottle. I would say that the colors overall ring a little more true on the polyester than they do on the acrylic. Well, maybe the purple's a little more true on the acrylic. It's hard to say. So anytime there is a specific color that you want to try to achieve, it could be worth trying to use a swatch of a similar fabric to get a sense of the hue that you could get. Because then you might know, okay, I might want to add a little more yellow or a lot more dye on an acrylic, whereas maybe I want less of the purple on the polyester. Quality-wise, I think that the 100% polyester yarns held up better in the dye pot through this hour of steaming than the acrylics did. The acrylics feel a little, not quite rougher, but there's no question that there was some melting going on here, and you can see some flattening and sort of just, it's not as lofty as it was before applying the heat, which this is something that should really be no surprise. You could melt acrylic with an iron, so this is just something to be aware of when you are playing around with these fiber types. I had heard that polyester is pretty hard to dye, so I am really, really impressed with the depth of shade that we got on the full hand painted one and with those relative sharpness of the speckles. 100% polyester yarn is a little less common than, say, 100% acrylic, but I think that this has a lot of potential for people who can't deal with wool or who want to find things locally that they can play around with yarn dyeing at home. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I hope that you found this video helpful. I get a lot of requests to dye synthetic yarns, and it's not something that I film a lot because honestly I don't use as many synthetic yarns. But now that we see how well these dyes work when I'm not using way too much of it, like I did in early Dyepot Weekly territory, let me know what other techniques you'd like me to explore with these yarns. I think that there's a lot of dyes that work really, really well on natural fibers, and with synthetics, there's not. And so you do need to go get a dye geared towards synthetic fibers if you want to dye something that is 100% acrylic or 100% polyester. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I release at least 2 new yarn dyeing videos a week every Tuesday and Friday morning, and I do love to explore cotton and wool and multiple different types of dye. And I think we have a lot of fun over here, so you should come and join the ChemKnits family. If you're already a big ChemKnits fan, go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. Every month I give patrons some options of what I will include in the upcoming Dyepot PS video, and you get to vote on them. And the runners-up sort of jump the queue for heading into Dyepot Weekly episodes. And so it's a great way to provide feedback of what videos you really, really want to see. Patrons also get a lot of really cool perks, like behind the scenes sneak peeks, early access to new content, and even coupons to the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. You can find links to the Patreon in the video description and iCard. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.